What's up guys, back with another video, and today I figure we could go over some of what I think are the best legendary effects for melee users. Now before we start, I'm mostly going to be focusing on weapon effects in this video, however I will also include a couple of noteworthy armor effects that can greatly benefit melee users as well. I will also be mentioning a few unique weapon variants that contain some of the legendary effects that I mentioned in this video. That way, if you're looking for a weapon that has a specific effect, you can find one relatively easily. But I guess without further ado, these will be the top 8 best legendary effects for melee weapons in Fallout 4, starting now. Number 8, the Assassin's Effect. While I must admit that I'm not particularly a fan of the enemy-specific legendary effects like the Ghoul Slayer's effect, the Troubleshooter's effect, or the Exterminator's effect, I do have to admit that I think that the Assassin's effect is by far the best, simply because there are so many human enemies in Fallout 4, and having a melee weapon with the Assassin's effect essentially gives you an additional 50% damage boost against human enemies, which is roughly the equivalent of adding an additional 5 strength. Generally, the weapons that will benefit from this effect the most are going to be weapons with higher base damage, so if you can manage to find the Assassin's effect on either the baseball bat, sledgehammer, pole hook, or super sledge, you're going to have a fairly powerful melee weapon against humans. Now, with this said, I do have to admit that I prefer something that provides a damage boost that is effective on all enemies and not just one or two specific types, though I suppose human enemies like raiders and gunners are common enough in Fallout 4 to make the Assassin's effect worthwhile. So if you do see this effect on a decent melee weapon, I'd say it's worth picking up. Number 7. The Penetrating Effect. Now, the Penetrating Effect isn't exclusive to melee weapons per se, but is a nice legendary weapon effect for melee weapons. All this effect does is simply what it says, which is to ignore 30% of the target's damage and energy resistance. Now, at first glance, this doesn't really seem all that useful, and in fact, this effect might seem to be a little bit lame to you. However, when combined with melee weapons that have armor penetration, the penetrating effect will make those weapons far more effective. At the very least, the ability to ignore a portion of the enemy's resistances will bring your damage numbers more in line with what is actually displayed on the item cards for most weapons. There are a number of unique weapons in Fallout 4's DLCs that do contain the penetrating effect. If you don't have the DLC, you will need to get lucky and find a melee weapon with the penetrating effect, but if you do have the DLC, you can gain access to both the Sword of Wonders Chinese Officer Sword and the Fence Buster Baseball Bat. And of the two, the Fence Buster is probably better because of the introduction of rocket baseball bats from Fallout 4's Nuka World DLC. And rocket bats will afford you higher damage output, and you can get special effects like armor penetration, bleed damage, as well as a tacked-on energy attack component that's similar to the stun pack for the Super Sledge. If you want to get the Fence Buster, you're going to need to go to Vault 118 and help solve the mystery there. Number 6. The Berserkers Effect. Now, this is a legendary effect that's often overlooked in favor of the other legendary effects on this list because of how it works. The Berserkers effect boosts the damage to lower the player's armor resistance, and at 0 resistances, you will deal 200% more damage. So effectively, you're going to be dealing double damage provided that you're not wearing any armor or clothing. And because of that, I think you'll find that the Berserkers effect would probably work best on a stealth melee build. Otherwise, if you were to get hit, you would be taking a significant amount of damage, and even if you had really high health, you would still succumb to radiation damage, which would reduce your overall maximum health. Even still, I could see the Berserker's effect being quite effective on the right melee weapons. Assuming you got a Berserker's combat knife or Disciple's blade, you would effectively be doubling the damage output of those weapons. Plus, you add in perks like Blitz, Ninja, and Mr. Sandman, and I would imagine that you could easily one-hit KO enemies in the nude with a Berserker's weapon. I guess what you have to ask yourself is whether or not you want to risk the low resistances or not. It seems like it could be worth it, but it could also prove to be extremely dangerous if you're spotted by an enemy. Number 5. The Fortifying Effect. So the Fortifying effect is fairly standard and can only appear on armor pieces. This effect boosts strength and endurance by 1 point, and with 6 pieces of armor that have this effect, the player should receive a boost of 6 to both their strength and endurance. And for each additional point that you have in strength, your attack power with unarmed and melee weapons should increase by about 10%, and your carry weight should increase by an additional 10 pounds. So you would be dealing about 60% more damage, and you could carry an additional 60 pounds of stuff. Each additional point in endurance will increase the player's maximum health and reduce the action points that are required to sprint. Now, obviously, what's most valuable here is the additional bonus to your attack power that comes without the need for power armor. And while power armor could theoretically make you much stronger, provided that you could find power armor pieces that bear the Fortifying effect, I've never actually seen a Fortifying power armor piece drop in-game. With this said, if you actually saw Fortifying power armor in-game, what I recommend you do is paint it with military paint and then get the motion-assisted servos for the core piece. That way, if you have 6 power armor pieces with the Fortifying effect, you'll be getting 6 strength from those. You'll get the motion-assisted servos, which I believe provides 2 strength, and then the military paint provides 1 strength, and this will give you a 90% increase to your melee attack power, which is pretty OP. Ultimately, keep an eye out for armor with this effect as a melee user, especially if you decide not to use power armor. The boost to attack power will prove to be quite useful, and the boost to maximum health and carry weight is also a nice touch. Number 4, the Sentinels effect. So the Sentinels effect on its own on a specific weapon isn't particularly amazing, however it is actually quite nice when combined with several other armor pieces that share the same effect. This is because one Sentinel's weapon or one Sentinel's armor piece allows the player to take 15% less damage while standing and not moving. Provided the player has 6 Sentinel's armor pieces and 1 Sentinel's weapon equipped, the player will effectively become immortal while standing still. And if you had 6 Sentinel's items equipped, you take 90% less damage when standing still. At the same time, the downside to this is that with melee weapons, you have no form of ranged attack, so you may find that you have to walk up to whatever you're attacking first, which will make you lose your damage reduction temporarily. There also aren't very many unique weapons, so you will need to keep an eye out for random legendary weapons and armor pieces that bear this effect. That said, there is the Reckoning Ripper, which contains the Sentinels effect, but the problem with the Reckoning is that it's acquired by having a level 4 weapons merchant in your settlement. And it also happens that there was and might still be a glitch involving the only level 4 weapons merchant in the game, which is named Smiling Larry. But assuming you could get him to your settlement and purchase the weapon from him, the Sentinels effect provided by the Reckoning is quite nice. Number 3. The VATS Enhanced effect. This legendary weapon effect is excellent for melee weapons because it will without fail make pretty much any melee weapon better. While you're not getting a damage boost, you do get lowered action point cost in VATS, which is really great for melee weapons. And this is because melee weapons can't get reduced action point cost by changing weapon customizations, and while this has its benefits, the inability to reduce action point cost this way does leave something to be desired. Otherwise, the VATS Enhanced effect does what it says and reduces action point cost by 40%. Though with this said, it doesn't appear that the VATS Enhanced effect reduces AP cost while performing power attacks, so if you really like power attacks, that is something to consider. If you're having a hard time finding a weapon with the VATS Enhanced effect, there are 2 unique weapons with the effect. The first is the vanilla game item known as the Rockville Slugger baseball bat, and the other is the Fish Catcher pole hook from Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC. The former can be purchased in Diamond City from Mo Cronin, while the Fish Catcher can be purchased from Alan in Far Harbor. Of the 2, the Rockville Slugger is probably better because of the weapon customizations that were added with the Nuka World DLC, but still, the Fish Catcher comes with innate armor penetration, and that could prove to be useful up against Mirelurks. So, if you're a melee user, keep an eye out for a VATS Enhanced version of a melee weapon because they are really great for VATS use. Number 2, the Furious effect. The Furious Effect is a legendary effect that can appear on all weapon types. While the Furious Effect tends to work best on automatic rifles, it can prove to be relatively effective on melee weapons with a fast attack speed or higher. This is because the Furious Effect increases damage on each consecutive hit on the same target. And because you're attacking faster with an automatic weapon or something like the Ripper, the Furious Effect is able to get more momentum and thus increase its damage potential after a period of sustained attacks. Otherwise, the Furious Effect is fairly straightforward. Just keep attacking the same enemy for enhanced damage so that the effect doesn't wear off or switch to a different enemy. Now, there are a few weapons from the Nuka World DLC that contain the Furious Effect, however they aren't melee weapons. However, there is an unarmed weapon called the Furious Power Fist that can be retrieved from Swan at Swan's Pond in Fallout 4's vanilla game. In fact, if you're planning to put together an unarmed melee build, the Furious Power Fist is probably the best unique or legendary weapon that you can get for that particular playstyle. And while other legendary Power Fist variants are probably better, the Furious Power Fist can be acquired very early and will guarantee that the player has a very powerful weapon early on. But if you're in the market for a more traditional melee weapon, you're simply going to have to just get lucky and find one with the Furious Effect. Number 1. The Wounding Effect. Now, the Wounding Effect can appear on all weapon types and is arguably one of the most overpowered weapon effects in the game. This is because the Wounding Effect deals 25 points of bleed damage over time, and this effect can stack on enemies. Also, unlike the vast majority of other damage types in Fallout 4, like poison, physical, or energy damage, no enemies really have bleed resistance, so you're guaranteed to deal the full 25 points of damage without any damage reduction. And because the Wounding Effect stacks, you're probably going to have the best time using this with melee weapons that have fast attack speed or higher. There are a few unique weapons that contain the Wounding Effect. From the vanilla game, you have the Pikmin's Blade combat knife, which can be acquired by helping Pikmin in Pikmin's Gallery, and from the Far Harbor DLC, you have the Bloodletter pole hook, which has armor penetration and can be acquired from Cassie Dalton upon completing the Blood Tide side quest, and finally, you have the Throat Slicer Disciple's Blade from the Nuka World DLC, which can be purchased from an NPC named Catelyn Alden. All of these weapons are relatively easy to get, though the Throat Slicer might be the most expensive one when compared to all of the others. Still, if you're looking for a powerful effect for a melee weapon, the Wounding Effect is probably the best. But alright guys, I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.